This narrative takes place on a chilly morning on the east coast of Canada in 1917 on December 6th. Halifax, Nova Scotia was bustling with activity during the war. The harbor was an essential link that allowed ships to cross the Atlantic to aid the Allies. No one could have predicted that the city's vitality would be shattered in an instant by a devastating crash and a massive explosion as it awoke. Unexpected acts of bravery, grief, and destruction followed this. What caused one of Canada's worst disasters to begin while two ships were just passing by on a regular route? How did a community recover from such devastating loss and then come together to rebuild? Come with us as we uncover the history of the Halifax Explosion and the lasting impact it had. There was a lot of strain on Halifax in 1917. Halifax, a strategic gem on Canada's Atlantic coast, has endured over time due to its deep, ice-free harbor. However, during the height of World War I, it assumed a fresh and critical function. Ships carrying goods, troops, and supplies clogged its seas. Shipyard hammers, train whistles, and the faraway rumbling of ocean liners adjusting their anchor chains filled the air with a buzzing, humming sound. A large number of people, including soldiers, dock workers, and refugees, had flocked to Halifax during the war in search of better economic opportunities. Cranes lowered enormous boxes along the shoreline. War materials, including blankets, boots, firearms, and ammunition, were loaded onto ships by longshoremen for shipment to the European trenches. The calm bob of fishing boats could be heard across Dartmouth's port. Shops, schools, and churches flourished in Halifax communities like Richmond. People managed rationed supplies and worried about loved ones overseas, but they continued to live day to day. As that tragic December morning rolled around, the Norwegian ship SS Imo was getting ready to sail out of Bedford Basin in Halifax. She was scheduled to leave without any cargo to reach New York, where she would restock aid for war-torn Belgium. The harbor pilot led her across the narrow Narrows, the waterway connecting Halifax and Dartmouth. The SS Mont Blanc, a cargo ship from France, was making its way slowly into port from the Atlantic at the same time. The explosive ingredients required for war production, a deadly cocktail of benzol, picric acid, TNT, and gun cotton, bummed her hold. In an ideal world, ships would follow the regulations laid down by the marine authorities. However, the harbor had become a treacherous dance floor due to the wartime overcrowding and last-minute alterations. Due to misunderstandings, the right-of-way became mixed up. Both ships were heading in the same direction at 8:45 a.m. Upon realizing the danger, the sailors on both ships began yelling orders and rapidly spinning their wheels. The Imo changed its direction, and the Mont Blanc made a final attempt to move. The ships gradually approached each other, revealing themselves to those observing from the shore. The collision was too mild to sink either ship, but disastrous for the Mont Blanc's secret cargo because of the scrapes and bumps it caused. A flurry of sparks ignited the benzol on the deck of the Mont Blanc. Scattering flames quickly engulfed the combustible load. Captain AELC and his crew, upon realizing the impending explosion, yelled out warnings in French, but the inquisitive onlookers and English-speaking dock workers paid them little attention. Rowing frantically towards land, they jumped ship. With dense black smoke rising into the sky, the Mont Blanc, transformed into a floating bomb, sailed toward the busy quay. The Haligonians watched the ship in flames from their windows. Kids, many of whom were getting ready for school and had only just eaten breakfast, hurried to get a better look. In the midst of moving crates, workers stopped, captivated by the sight of a burning ship in the harbor. Not everyone there realized they were seeing the beginning of something really historic, rather than merely a naval mishap. Important messages were picked up by telegraph operators. Railwaymen, unsure of what lay ahead, held up trains coming from the west. People put their faces to the glass windows at stores and churches, and the air became dead silent. Regrettably, the harbor pilot had already evacuated the crowded shoreline when he signaled the sirens. The city waited for 20 minutes, its residents wondering what would happen next, but not yet terrified. The freight on the Mont Blanc went off at 9:45 a.m., with an unbelievable amount of force. The planet-sized detonation instantly turned the ship into a gas cloud. A dazzling burst of white light engulfed the waterfront. As the shockwave spread, it caused entire neighborhoods to collapse and buildings to shatter like matchsticks. A blazing ball of fire shot into the sky, and the deafening boom reverberated through the countryside and cities up to 80 kilometers away. Richmond and the neighboring areas were central to the destruction. The ground ripped away debris, including trees, and telephone poles. The impact triggered a miniature tsunami that washed on shore, engulfing streets and causing the drowning of anyone caught in its path. Metal, wood, and glass shards became lethal fragments. Some 3 kilometers distant, a massive anchor fragment from Mont Blanc touched down. Tragedy struck when the stunned survivors stepped out into a scene they hardly knew. Derailed trains, crumbling factories, and blazing fires in every direction. There was anarchy in the immediate aftermath of the explosion. Victims poured into hospitals which were already in a state of disrepair. By the light of lanterns, the medical staff applied bandages made from ripped tablecloths. Workers on the railways quickly assembled rescue teams upon witnessing the destruction. Pulling neighbors from beneath collapsed roofs and carrying the wounded across rubble-strewn streets, ordinary individuals became heroes out of need. Due to the wreckage, firefighters and police had a difficult time navigating the highways. Due to the broken telephone and telegraph connections, communication was extremely difficult. Paranoia during the war led some to believe that German saboteurs were responsible for the explosion. However, as time passed and more information became available, it became evident that this was not a hostile attack but rather a sad accident. The grim truth hit. Over 1,900 individuals perished in an instant. Numerous individuals sustained severe injuries or lost limbs as a result of flying glass, adding to the thousands of casualties. Amidst mounds of broken brick and lumber, many families frantically sought loved ones. News of the tragedy quickly traveled across the country and abroad. Charities and governments came together to dispatch aid. Trains carrying nurses, doctors, and supplies arrived as soon as they freed the tracks. Boston, a city permanently connected to Halifax by this tragedy, had one of the most spectacular replies. Boston authorities organized a relief train within hours of receiving the news. Despite blizzards and obstructed tracks, it hurried north to deliver surgeons, volunteers, and much-needed medical equipment. This act of generosity was deeply appreciated. Halifax eventually started the annual custom of sending a Christmas tree to Boston as a token of thanks, and the gift has been going strong ever since. The Christmas tree symbolizes the strength and unity of the human spirit in overcoming unimaginable grief. Nature dealt an even crueler blow, as if the explosion hadn't been devastating enough. The following day after the explosion, Halifax experienced a heavy snowfall. Ice and snow were another obstacle that search parties had to overcome, in addition to the jumbled debris. Survivors bundled themselves in whatever blankets they could find and crowded together in impromptu shelters. As they trudged through the snow, some cried out the names of loved ones who had gone missing, while others sought refuge in the cold wasteland. The resilience of the community was evident nevertheless, even in this trying time. The newly homeless were taken in by strangers who warmed them with hot soup or their body heat as they battled the freezing weather. Despite the cold and numbness in their faces, rescue workers persisted in their quest. Squirming through broken beams, they pried up collapsed cellars and listened intently for muted cries hidden behind snow and rubble. Halifax had the enormous challenge of rebuilding in the subsequent months and years. Tents, tarps, and hastily constructed wooden shacks were the first forms of temporary shelter. To guarantee stronger construction, engineers created new building codes. Better infrastructure and safer streets were the results of planners rethinking whole neighborhoods. Halifax slowly regained its footing with the help of international donations and government grants. There were survivors who bore apparent and invisible wounds. Stories of an event that changed their family's history were passed down to later generations by those who lived in the area after the explosion. The most important legacy of the Halifax explosion is probably the overwhelming number of brave and selfless deeds that emerged from the city's worst hour. Amidst the devastation that rocked the city, the finest qualities of humanity shone through. Devastation can come fast and mercilessly, but the human spirit's resilience and kindness can rebuild and pave the way for what's to come.